Okay, well, we're here again with Natives at KU, presented by the Indigenous Studies Department. I'm Rain Charger, and I'm here with Lori Hassleman. Hey, Lori.
Hi, Rain.
Hey, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
So you came to KU at the same time I did, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's just kind of like start with a little bit of background about you, and then we'll kind of get into your work or whatever you want to we'll call it. So where are you from, Lori, and who are you? Who are your people?
Well, first of all, Rain, it is work. We're graduate students. We're super tired, right?
For sure.
I actually was born in Tulsa, and I moved to Kansas for grade school. And so I started kindergarten in Abilene, Kansas, which is just west of here,
Right.
about an hour and a half. So that's where I went to school. My tribe is Delaware, Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. They're located in Bartlesville, not
Right.
Anadarko. We like to make that distinction sometimes. And then I'm also an enrolled citizen of the Shawnee Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma, and they're in Miami.
Right. What were some of the things you focused on while you were at Haskell?
You were in our capstone class, so I kind of started focusing on education at an early point at Haskell, just because when you're operating in those systems, you understand a little bit better what the need is.
Right.
So being submerged at a tribal college and in that experience, I understood that there were barriers that needed to be removed so our people could be successful and kind of create a pathway in order for Native people to be educated in multi-ways. Right. So that was a big focus for me when I was at Haskell or in my undergrad, just to from the very beginning.
Was just that immediate education focus?
Yeah, I mean that wasn't 100% focus.
Right,
I actually worked in media a little bit at Haskell too. I worked on the Indian Leader and did some Haskell News stuff, and that was fun. That was cool. And I also did some internships. I did the HERS internship, so that was environmental science based, and that added a really cool component to my education. And then, of course, Barb and I did the Indigenous Peoples Day thing. Woo, Barb! So that was really cool, too. I mean, just working with Barb, she comes at everything from sort of an activist perspective, and so that really helped me a lot in everything I do. It was very inspirational because I still am able to kind of look at things from that perspective now to this day. I always hear her voice in my head going, "Come on, Lori."
She kind of is infectious, Barb.
Yeah.
You know, so you're kind of another person I think of when I think of like the Haskell KU community, the amorphous blob that it is, you know. And I think this series is cool for that because we're kind of like defining it a little bit, you know, or at least talking about it. So what has your experience been like as a Haskell graduate who moved up the hill? You know, there's a couple of us throughout this interview series, and I always like getting everyone's perspective about that because it's so, I don't know, it's so poignant in all of our lives to have come from Haskell up to KU. You know, it's definitely a transition. Right.
I mean, I'm going to be real. It was not easy for me at all. I mean, I didn't actually originate from a reservation or grew up around my people in a lot of respects. But so I didn't expect that the transition was going to be very difficult because I was used to being in a predominantly white environment. But after being at Haskell and kind of connecting to your people in ways that are natural and inherent, it got really difficult to get away from, because when you are at Haskell and when you're around your people, you're constantly talking about issues that are salient for you and your people. But so when I came to KU, actually I came in the summer, so that was unique to that situation, and so there wasn't really any students on campus. But after all my friends came in the fall, then things got better, and so I started getting involved in some clubs and some different areas. But it wasn't an easy transition, and which I think is really important that we should discuss and talk about.
Right.
That how students of color in general, and especially Native students, transition into predominantly white institutions.
Right. Maybe make that transition a little easier.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good point to get into kind of like what you're doing these days, right? And so what are some of those challenges that you kind of see? Because you have a unique perspective, right? You were helping people get their assigned classes here at KU, and now you're kind of working also between KU and Haskell, am I right?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit there. So I think you have a unique perspective on this, and I think you probably have a better assertion or analysis of what could be done to kind of make that transition easier. Do you have any input on that? Or?
Well, I mean, we've talked about that. I participate in the Native Faculty and Staff Council, and so we have talked about that at length, about what we can do to support students and, of course, faculty and staff at KU. But I actually just started working with the Haskell KU Exchange Partnership. Sure. And I really just am a graduate assistant in that realm and helping Melissa. Melissa's doing nearly all of the footwork in that space and doing a great job at it at that. So, but I also advise other students in the Undergraduate Advising Center that have the same sort of issues.
Right.
So I guess what I'm thinking, I guess, in terms of transitioning from Haskell to KU is that you really have to know who your students are. You have to meet them where they're at. And we don't know a lot about Native students at KU, or the people at KU don't know a lot about who Native students are.
Right.
We need to know that education is very important for Native students.
Right.
I mean, we Native people have been operating in our own educational systems forever.
Right.
So we still operate in those educational systems. But I think what's important to understand too is that because of those systems that we operate in, it's not as linear as Western systems.
Right.
Okay, so storytelling is a big deal. And that's how we educate each other. And so I know stories from my grandparents that they've told from our ancestors and from elders and within our tribe at ceremony. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and that's how our educational system works. So when we come here to a Western system of education, we are actually operating in the same systems that our relatives operated in, that were set up to dismantle and oppress our identities. Right. And so I think that those are important things to think about, because that's the point where Native students start.
Right.
So I'm all about student success. I'm all about trying to get degrees in hands of our Native people. And so I think that's something that we need to consider too when Native students come to KU.
So with your actual graduate work, whatever that means, the stuff you might be doing for your department.
Real stuff.
Yeah. What is that looking like, Lori? Because that's something we've never actually gotten to discuss at length together. What does your work for your department look like, if I can ask that?
Well, I can tell you that I'm not sleeping, so... But, I'm just trying to learn about some of those things that we just talked about.
Right.
And how that, retention has always been a thing for me.
Right.
I can pronounce graduation now. But I have always been really interested in what it takes in Western schools and at tribal colleges,
right,
how we can retain students and why that's important. I think if you look at what's going on in the world right now, that you can see how important it is for especially Native students to get their education.
Right.
Aside from operating in the same traditional systems that we still have, we also need to know more about the spaces that we operate in that are outside of that, because we have rights to protect.
Right.
We have sovereignty, we have culture, we have land, And that's going to be super important as we move forward and as we evolve as a people to be able to build capacity for our nations. And so I know some people say, well, we walk in two worlds.
Right.
I've heard that a lot, and I know a lot of people have heard that, but I always fall back on something that Dr. Wildcat said in one of our classes, and he was like, well, you may walk in two worlds, but you always operate in both worlds as a Native person and as with Indigenous thought.
Right.
And so because of that, I think that it's just super important that we need to know how that we're going to claim our space in educational areas.
Right.
I mean, here at KU, as Native students, we need to be claiming our space and be having enough knowledge to operate and articulate what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so those are some of the things that I've been kind of studying about and working on. It's not part of the regular curriculum, for sure. But I do find ways to figure out how I'm going to study those things. There's options where you can, write papers. I'm doing a lit review right now on Native American or Indigenous student retention in predominantly white institutions. So I do actually want to point out, too, that the acquisition of knowledge is also important to Native people in that our relationality to each other and the way we operate within our tribes. Right. Because as a form of self-development, it helps us get to a place where we can develop that relationship within our people in a way that, or in ways that we share knowledge.
Right.
And so that is super important too in terms of education for Native students.
Okay, so we are walking into worlds, right? But we always seem to say it in relationship to the other world.
Right.
And so one of the things that I think we forget to do is kind of talk about how we do talk to each other as Indigenous people and really caring about that as a space, and not being so tight with it either, not being so afraid to discuss it.
Education is a two-way street, right? It's not just for people who are operating in these systems. Even if you're outside of an educational institution, you need to educate yourself on what's happening. But, I mean, more so important for us because, again, we have to protect our rights. We have to protect our identity in this political climate. Right. If you can see what's happening, there's a huge possibility that very soon that we're going to have to create some action to try and protect our identities and those rights.
Right.
And so we need to have the proper tools to do that, and that's what I'm here for.
As a fellow media person, you, I think, have a really cool maybe outlook on what maybe we as natives can kind of do to be those bridges or to be, whatever we are to kind of get these messages across. It's great to be putting stuff out in academic journals and all these other academic spaces, But then there are gates, too, that we have to also recognize that these gates can kind of, someone on the res maybe can't really access JSTOR or something, Do you see the best way for going about getting our issues out there or getting our discussion forums out there? Obviously social media, but is there anything you think like, oh, there's the gap?
Well, I mean, we definitely need more Native journalists.
Right.
We need our own people behind the pen to tell our stories. And so that's a huge gap. Mm-hmm. And so we need more of that. I mean, some great things are happening.
Right.
I mean, we have Native Comic-Con now. I know. Documentary filmmakers. The Dewey guy, I can't think of his name. Myron Dewey.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think those ways, I mean, we're really kind of infiltrating that space, which is completely needed and completely cool. So we have to be able to have our own agency, to be able to have our own voice, to tell our own stories and to tell how, our successes. We concentrate so much on how, disparities and retention rates and graduation rates and things like that. And there's so many successes. I mean, it's like it's a huge victory every time a Native student walks across the graduation stage, because it's like, hey, we're not only operating in our systems, but we conquered yours too. So guess what?
These media things are a lot of times can seem like power structures, or operate as power structures. I mean, even here in town, sometimes we have journalists who aren't necessarily so friendly towards natives, and not to get into any kind of political drama or anything, but it just is the truth. It's just objectively the way it is.
Right, and I think that's just the direction that media, or like some aspects of reporting or news reporting, is going. And that's why it's even more important for us to kind of claim that space too, as Indigenous. So, I mean, we have collaborated. When I was on the Indian Leader, we collaborated with Sunflower Publishing on a couple of things, and they were very receptive to how we wanted to tell our own story, and they pretty much let us kind of take control and do whatever we wanted to. And actually, the piece won an international award. So,
really? Oh my God!
So that was pretty cool. But yeah, they were really nice to work with. But I think that again is just an exchange. You have to kind of put yourself and claim those spaces in order if you want to educate people on what your needs are, or what's going on with your people, right?